so good to see you this morning, and you are now excited to see me, even if you have no idea who I am, and that's great. I love that. Matt told you a little bit about me, and he definitely talked me up. I am not as awesome as he made it out to be, but my name is Chelsea, and I'm really grateful that I get to hang out with you this morning. You learned something about me, but I feel like I want to know who's in the room, who you are. I may not know anything about you. So here's what I need to do first. I need some help here. Can anyone tell me what this is? Can you shout it out for me? Label maker, yes. Hopefully you've seen one of these before. Now here's where I'm going to find out who you are, okay? I need you to raise your hand if you see this and you get so excited. You're like, please let me get my hands on this thing. I love labels. Yes, I see a few hands in the room. I hear some claps. Don't be ashamed. We love our label people. Now, I need you to raise your hand if you're in the room and you think, please keep that thing away from me. I want nothing to do with that. Don't make me label anything. Anybody in the room? That's you. Yep, I see some people pointing at other people. That's me. I get that 100%. But wherever you are on this spectrum, no matter how you feel about label makers, we have to admit, this is one of the greatest inventions of our time. Forget about smartphones, forget about cars that drive themselves. I mean, the label maker is unrivaled modern technology. In fact, in 2021, the New York Times put out an entire article telling us what label makers we should buy. While some of you were looking at the newest Apple Watch or what drone you might get this year, the rest of us were looking at top-of-the-line label makers. And here's why. In 2020, we all decided it was time to get organized. We probably spent more time in our homes than ever before, and we got up close and personal with our junk drawers, with our pantries, with our garage. And some of you got out that label maker, and you ended 2020 with a garage looking something like this. Look at that beautiful garage. I mean, this garage, it actually belongs to my boss, Matt Hayes. No lie, this is his real garage. Shout out to his wife, Larson, who provided these photos for me. But when I saw this garage, now mind you, the Hayes have 5 kids. And when I saw this garage, I thought, how in the world does someone with 5 kids have time to make their garage look like that? How many labels did they use to get there? I can't imagine. But some of you see that garage and you're like, oh, tough, because I came out of 2020 with a garage looking a little bit more like this. Yeah, anybody got a garage that looks like that? Be honest, come on. Now, before you laugh too hard, spoiler alert, this is my garage, and I don't have any kids, so I have no excuse. But I've got a bench in there that started to get built in 2020. It didn't get finished in 2020, but maybe we'll finish it one day. We've got a deer head that I think my husband pulled out of a dumpster from somewhere. I don't know what we're going to do with it, but we have it. And we've got an inflatable pool that we bought in 2020, because everybody bought an inflatable pool in 2020, and it has a hole, but we kept it anyways. So what my garage does not have is any labels. And I don't know if your garage looks more like Matt's or more like mine, but I tend to think if I could take this label maker home, it would really help me with some things. I mean, how incredible would it be if I could take this to my garage and wave it around like a magic wand, and it would turn out looking like Matt's beautiful garage. For the price of some of these, you would think it was capable of that, but it's not, unfortunately. And although I'm not good at this, I will admit I am not good at organizing or labeling, but I have to admit that there's something so satisfying about typing in a word, clicking that print button, and seeing that beautiful label print out the top. Now, it's not a real word. I've typed in quite a few things in there this morning, so We won't use that on any actual bins, but there's something so satisfying about seeing that label print out and then the end product, the beautiful garage, the orderly pantry, the clean closet. Labels make things look more beautiful and clean and organized, but labels are also helpful. When we label the bins in our garage so we know where the beach towels are, that's helpful. When we label the containers in our pantry so we don't grab the flour when we're going for the sugar, that is helpful. Labels make things orderly and beautiful, but they're also incredibly helpful. Whether you have a label maker or not, we all label things. We mentally label things. You see, labels, they create structure in our thoughts and in our lives. Labels, they help us simplify. They bring peace and order. And who doesn't want that? This tendency to label and categorize everything possible, it goes beyond our container store obsessions. It's actually linked to a part of our brain. Now, for a few minutes here, I'm going to ask you to nerd out with me, okay? So I just need you to lean in. Don't tune me out just yet. I'm just going to ask you to follow me on my nerdy moment, okay? Because there's this really fancy scientific word that explains this part of our brain that loves to label. It's called the reticular activating system. Now, for my science people in the room, I'm going to ask you to give me a lot of grace. Because obviously I work at a church and I've never even seen Grey's Anatomy, so me and brain science, we just don't really compute. But I have read about this and it is fascinating. The RAS is essentially a part of our brain that takes in the world around us and categorizes it. Our brain is like that beautiful Matt Hayes garage. It takes everything in, it finds the right bin for it, puts it on the shelf, and sticks a big label on it. Now, let me give you an example of what this looks like. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in my brain. My brain has labeled some really specific songs over the years, specifically some songs that are correlated to certain football teams. And when this song comes on, my brain labels it awesome. Yes, I got my dog fans in the front. Anybody else in this room, you're a dog fan? Yeah, come on. I need a louder showing than that next time. People, thank you. Come on. I went to the University of Georgia, and the moment I roll into the classic city and I hear that UGA fight song, I know I have reached holy ground. But there is another song. And when I hear this song come on, my brain labels it something else entirely. Boo. We have I see some people clapping. You don't have to be ashamed. It's okay. We had some Tennessee fans at the 9 o'clock, and they were loud. So I was expecting some showing out in here, but if you're a Tennessee fan, no shame. It's fine. But for me, who knew that 2 words, Rocky Top, could cause so much nausea? That's how our brain works. It labels things: good, bad, awesome, not so awesome, winners, losers. From the moment we're born, our brain begins its job. It creates these pathways that inform our perspective of the world, telling us how to think and how to feel and how to respond. Now, a little more science, just for a few minutes. Those patterns in our brain, the more we see a pattern, the more we label it, and the more it becomes a pathway. The first time I heard the UGA fight song, I didn't have a label for it. But after 4 glorious years of beating Tennessee, the label started to stick. Now, it's kind of like when you drive home and you get in your driveway and you think, how in the world did I actually get here? I don't remember looking at the road. I don't remember the turns that I took, but somehow you get there every day. It's because day after day, you formed a pattern in your brain that's created this pathway. Our brains are designed to label the world around us, to categorize and organize and label so that we can move through life more efficiently. Now, maybe you're thinking, why does any of this matter to me? Is this just a long sales pitch for a label maker? Or is this science class going to end anytime soon? I get it. But here's the thing. I think this tendency to label everything, I don't think it's all good. In fact, I think it creates a problem for us. Our labels don't stop with our garage or our college allegiances. The problem is we also label people. We label our kids. We label our neighbors. We label that person that never stops posting on Facebook. The labels sound different than the ones in our pantry, but they operate the same way in our brain. Think about it. We have an entire portion of our high school yearbooks that are dedicated to these labels. We were all asked to vote to give our classmates a label at some point. And they might have sounded like most likely to succeed, best dressed, class clown, most likely to show up late to graduation, cutest couple. But these labels, they didn't stop in high school. And you know this is true because someone has labeled you along the way. Someone has said something to you or about you, and effectively they gave you a label. Maybe those labels sounded something like, man, you are short. You're a lot. You're no fun. You're just not as athletic as your brother. You are always the bridesmaid. You're the life of the party. You're too much. You're not enough. You don't have what it takes. I'm sorry, but you're just not the right fit. Those labels, they stick. And it can be incredibly hard to take them off. Now, when I was in high school, I was given a label. I was given a lot of labels. I got this anonymous message online the day after I went to a party that I never should have been at. I was in a season of my life when I was not making great decisions. In fact, I was making pretty bad decisions. I had some things going on at home, and I would do just about anything to feel loved or accepted, to feel like I belong somewhere. And I got this anonymous message in the middle of that season. It read, "Why did you even come to the party last night? No one wanted you there." Uh-oh. Sorry, guys, I lost my label. No one wanted you there. Now, I was given that label 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. And to this day, I don't know who wrote it. But that label, it stuck. And I've carried it with me for years. When I walk into a room of people I don't know or people I don't feel comfortable with, this label looms over me, begging the question, am I wanted here? Am I welcome here? When I see that picture on Instagram of all of my friends hanging out and somehow my invitation got lost in the mail, my brain says, yeah, remember? You're unwanted. They didn't want you there. I hesitate to take risks in my job or go after opportunities because I'm afraid that rejection will only validate what I have already believed to be true. The words of a random person, they became a label, an incredibly sticky one. And that label has affected the way I show up in the world in more ways than I care to admit. We've all taken on labels throughout our lives. From the work that we do, or the way that we score on the Enneagram, or the role that we play in our family. But we've also been given a lot of labels from the people around us. And those labels have stuck. We were all taught a saying when we were kids that would suggest otherwise, that would suggest that these labels shouldn't matter to us. It sounded something like this. Say it with me. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's right. You got it. A+. But a few years ago, I heard Gavin say this in a different way, and it made a lot more sense to me. He said this: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will send me to counseling. Does anybody remember that? I do. I remember that because it is so true. I mean, how many of us in this room can remember words spoken to us or about us that hurt? All of these words that have been spoken about us that we've taken on as a label. Always the bridesmaid, short, life of the party, not enough, unwanted. They become labels that we've put on and kept with us for months, years, even decades. And the scary part is, most of those labels are not even true. Most of these labels, they're subjective. They're based on the opinions of other people. Most of those labels, they're not even close to the truth about who you are. They are, in fact, lies. But here's what I'm learning about the power of a lie. A lie believed as truth will affect your life as if it were truth. If you believe any of these labels as truth about who you are, they will affect your life as if they are truth. So, what do we do with this? We've been given these labels and they've stuck. What do we do now? I guess moving forward, we just never listen to another person. We don't let words affect us. We tune out the haters, we put in earplugs, and we silence every voice around us. Well, I don't know about you, but for me, that doesn't feel like a realistic solution because I don't know how to stop listening to people. I live with people. I work with people. I love people. And I certainly don't want to live in a perpetual state of earmuffs. But the good news is, I think there's another way. In the pages of our New Testament, we have a lot of writings from a guy named Paul. Now, Elaine told us a little bit about Paul last week. But if you know anything about Paul, he was one of the most fundamental people in spreading the story of Jesus in the first century. One of the most fundamental people in building the church. But Paul was well acquainted with what it was like to be given a label that was hard to shake. In the pages of our Bible, Paul is labeled a persecutor of Christians, a murderer of Christians, a destroyer of the church. Fast forward in his life, and he has an encounter with Jesus that changes him forever. And where we pick up in the story, Paul is writing to one of those churches to encourage them, to the church in Colossae, and he has something incredibly important to say about the labels they've been wearing. He says, "Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator." Paul is saying, hey, when you decided to follow Jesus, you took off the old self. All of those old labels that you've identified with, You got rid of them because you were given a new self. You have brand new labels. He goes on. Here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. What he's essentially saying here is, in Jesus, there are no more man-made labels. In Colossae, the labels sounded like Jew or Gentile, slave or free, but for us, they might sound more like successful or failure, rich or poor, beautiful or ugly. To which Paul would say, no, you're missing the point here. The moment you decided to follow Jesus, all of those labels were stripped away. You were given a brand new set of labels. You are no longer defined by any of these. You are actually being renewed. Now, I want to hang out on this word renewed for a minute because I think it could be the key to this entire label thing. There's a lot that our Bible says about being renewed, but there's one passage in particular that's pretty famous, and it also comes from a letter that Paul wrote to another church, to a church in Rome. This is what Paul told them about being renewed. He said, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Paul says, hey, you actually don't have to conform to the pattern of this world. You don't have to conform to the patterns in your mind. You have the ability to be transformed, to be renewed. You have the ability to renew these labels, to renew your mind. And what's crazy is that scientists have actually proven this to be true. We are physically capable of rewiring the pathways in our brain. How crazy is that? But Paul suggests that the way that we do this is by allowing God to renew us, to renew our way of thinking, to renew the patterns in our brain, to renew our labels, and renew our identity. And he says that when we do that, something really incredible happens. He tells us through his life and through these letters to these churches that we have an option. We can choose to continue giving power to these old labels. We can choose to look to these labels when we answer the question, who are you? Or we can actively choose to renew our minds, trading the old self for the new, trading all of those labels that everyone around you has put on you for the labels that God has given. Now, maybe you've heard the labels God has given you before, but maybe you haven't. Maybe today you're wondering, what are those labels? Well, Paul finished his thought to the Colossians with some of those. There are a lot. He has a lot to say about you, but there are three that Paul touches on that I think are important for us today. He said, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Paul said, hey, God has got some incredible labels for you. God has labeled you chosen, intentionally set apart, pursued, wanted. God has also labeled you holy. When God looks at you, he sees someone who is blameless, no matter what. He sees you as righteous, pure, justified, worthy. And God has labeled you loved, dearly loved. the object of his affection. His child and his creation, you are his beloved. Everyone around you has been trying to label you for your entire life. And maybe you didn't know you weren't supposed to accept those labels. And maybe if you did, they were just too hard to resist. But here's what I would argue. The one who created you is the only one who deserves to label you. The one who created you is the only one who deserves to label you. And this is a big deal because people are not going to stop labeling you. We're all just too good at labeling. We've all got a stack of labels in our back pocket and a Sharpie at the ready. But here's the good news. You don't have to wear every label that is offered to you. You have a say in which labels you allow to define you. And if we're going to take on any labels, wouldn't it make sense that we would look to the labels that came from the one who created us? If we're going to reference any labels when answering the question, who are you? Wouldn't we look to the labels that came from the God who knew you before you ever came to be? No one would ask me to label distress. If you didn't know, every piece of clothing has a label inside of it. I found out this morning some people don't know that. So there's a label in there. No one would ask me to put the label on the inside of this dress because I don't know how much cotton is in that dress. I don't know how much polyester is in there. I don't know how to wash it and dry it because I'm not the one who created it. The person who created this dress knows exactly what it's made of and exactly how to take care of it. And the same is true with God. His labels for us, they are the only ones that hold water. They are the only ones that are based in absolute truth. And some of you are thinking, hey, Chelsea, this would have been great to know when I was in middle school or when I was in college or even last week in my job, but here I am now. I have all these labels that have been given to me, and sure, it's nice to know that I'm chosen and holy and loved, but it's really hard to feel like I'm those things. It's really hard to believe that that's true. So how do I do that? How do I shake the old labels, and how do I really believe that these are the ones that I'm given? How do I place my identity in the labels that God has given me? Well, I would say it takes 2 simple steps. You remove the lie and you replace it with truth. You peel up each of those old labels. Day by day, you pick a label and you take it off. You decide those labels have no power over me any longer. Even if there's a label that feels good, the life of the party, the best, you're gifted, even those labels, if those are the labels you put your identity in, they will only lead to destruction. Because any label, any identity found outside of Christ, it will fall short. It will leave you empty. It will be insufficient and unfulfilling. Day by day, you have a choice. You can remove the lies and replace them with the truth of what God has said about you. That you, yes, you, are chosen, holy, and loved. And with God's help, you can literally change the patterns in your brain. You can change your pathways of thinking. But this takes repetition. Because in the same way that a pathway is not created in a day, it can't be changed in a day. It takes choosing over and over. When you wake up in the morning, when you're sitting in the car rider line, when you're on your way home from work after a long, hard day, it requires you choosing over and over to remove the lie and replace it with truth until you believe it as the truth. So here's what I would like to do today, if you'd let me. I'd like to start that process with you. But here's what I know is true. You cannot replace what you do not define. And so today, in this moment, I want you to define one label. Just one label that's been given to you that maybe you've held on to for far too long. One label that came from the words of someone else that no longer will have a hold on you. And I want you to be courageous and actually write it down. When you walked in today, you all had a label and a Sharpie on your seat, and some of you saw it and you thought, I just am leaving now because I don't want to do whatever she's going to ask me to do. Some of you accidentally put your name on it, and that's totally fine too. But if you didn't fill it out just yet, I want you to do that right now. I'm going to give you a moment, but I'm going to ask you to lean in here. I'm going to ask you to be courageous, to be vulnerable, and to define a label that you are ready to let go of today. And as these words are sung over you, I want you to think about, I want you to imagine, what would your life look like if that label was no longer the label that defined you? How would your life look different? How would you show up in your marriage? How would you date? How would you treat your neighbor? How would you parent your kids if this label was not the one hanging over your head anymore? Because people are not going to stop giving us labels. And we're going to be tempted to look to all those when answering, who are you? But today, one of the most important questions that you could answer is, who does God say you are?
Just as I am, you welcome me. With open arms, how can this be? My guilt is undone, my past is untethered. And I leave it behind and run to my Father. There is no disappointment in your eyes. There is no shame, there is only pride. And I am loved, Father, I'm loved by you. So unreserved your heart for me. My fear is gone and I'm set free. There's nothing to hide, there's nothing to measure. 'Cause I am your child, and that's all that matters. and I am loved. Father, I'm loved by you. There is no distance in your embrace. Over and over again you say that I am loved. Father, I'm loved by you. Yes, I am. I am loved. Father, I'm loved by you. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. I believe it. I receive it. You are changing everything. Oh, you are changing everything. You are changing everything. I believe it, I receive it. You are changing everything. There is no disappointment in yours. There is no shame, there is only pride. And I am loved. Father, I'm loved by you. There is no distance in your embrace. Over and over again you say that I am. Father, I'm loved by you. I am. Father, I'm loved by you.
Can I ask you something? Are you ready to let go of that label in your hand? Are you ready to replace it with what God has said about you? And even if you haven't decided to follow Jesus, even if you're not sure about this whole thing, you've been given labels. You've been given labels that you don't love. We all have. And so what if today was the day that you let that label go? I'm going to ask you to do that. To literally leave that label behind. As you head out today, if you look on the right-hand side on the rotunda, the series artwork is on the wall, and there's some labels that some really courageous people left behind. And I want to invite you to do that today, to stick your label on that wall and leave it forever. And then this week, when it starts to creep back up, I want you to remember what God has said about you, that you are chosen and holy and loved. Remove that lie and replace it with truth until you believe it. Can I pray for you? Heavenly Father, God, we thank you that because of you, there are no more man-made labels. God, that in you we have been given a brand new set. We thank you, God, that even though we don't deserve any of these labels, you have called us chosen, holy, and loved. Father, we ask that you would help us believe that. We ask that you would remind us when we start to forget. God, we ask that you would renew our minds because we know we can't do it alone. And thank you, God, that you are not a God that asks us to, that you come alongside us in every step of the way. Father, this week, remind us who we are in you. We love you. It's in your name I pray. Amen. Well, thank you for being with me this morning. It was an absolute joy. I hope you're here next week, and we hope you have a great week.